They towed my truck without warning, and that should have been the end of it. Just another crappy Monday, right? Except it wasn't, because what they didn't just take my truck. It woke something up in me I didn't even know was still there. And by the time it was over, they didn't just lose a fight, they lost the one thing they cared about most. So here's what happened. I got back late Sunday afternoon after spending a couple days out at my cousin Nate's place up in Pine Ridge, nothing fancy, just helping him patch a fence line and drink cheap beer by a fire that smoked more than it burned. The kind of weekend that leaves you tired in a good way, you know? Dust on your boots, sunburn on your neck, and your phone mostly forgotten in the glove box. I pulled onto my gravel drive just as the sun was dropping behind the trees, that soft orange light hitting everything just right, and the first thing that fell off was the space. You ever get that feeling where something's wrong before you even understand what it is? That little itch in your brain? Yeah, that. Because right there, next to the old tool shed where it always sat, was nothing. No truck. No rusted blue body. No crooked bumper. No dented tailgate I'd been meaning to fix for about 6 years now. Just an empty patch of gravel like it had never existed. At first I thought maybe I'd parked it further down the drive before I left, which didn't make any sense, but your brain does weird things when it's trying to avoid bad news. So I walked the length of the property, slow at first, then faster, then I was halfway jogging like somehow it had just moved. It hadn't. When I got back up to the road, that's when I saw it. A bright yellow notice, zip-tied to the post by the edge of my driveway, like some kind of trophy. Clean. Laminated. Official looking in that smug, overconfident way. It read, "Vehicle removed due to violation of neighborhood parking guidelines." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it didn't make any sense at all. Neighborhood? I don't live in a neighborhood. At least not the kind they were talking about. My place sits just outside the boundary of a gated development called Silver Creek Estates, and when I say outside, I mean technically not part of it at all. No HOA fees, no bylaws, no neatly trimmed hedges or matching mailboxes, just my 2 acres of uneven ground, a gravel drive, and whatever I decide belongs on it. But my driveway runs along the edge of their overflow parking lot, the one they built next to their clubhouse, and I guess, to them, that was close enough. Close enough to decide my truck offended their view. I pulled the notice off the post and turned it over, and sure enough, there was a number printed on the bottom. So I called it. A woman answered, bored voice, like she'd said the same thing 100 times that day. Talon Recovery Services. Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I'm calling about a truck that was towed from my property, actually. There was a pause, keyboard clicking in the background. Name. Daniel Mercer. More typing. Then, yes, we have a 1998 Ford F-150 registered under that name. Pickup authorized by Silver Creek Estates, HOA. I felt my jaw tighten. Authorized by who? Order was signed by the HOA president, Mr. Gerald Pike. That name hit me like a bad taste. I'd never spoken to the guy, but I'd seen him, tall, always in those pressed polos, walking around like he personally invented lawns. And how much to get it back? I asked. $1,200. Cash only. I actually thought I misheard her. I'm sorry, what? $1,200. She repeated, slower this time, like I was the problem. I looked out at the empty space again, the gravel still pressed down where the tires had been. Yeah, I said quietly, I'll be there. The drive to the towing yard felt longer than it should have. Every mile giving me more time to think, which wasn't helping. By the time I got there, the anger had settled into something heavier, something quieter. They had no right. That's what kept looping in my head. No right. The yard itself was exactly what you'd expect. Chain-link fence, rows of impounded cars baking under the sun, a small office that smelled like stale coffee, and paperwork that hadn't been touched in years. I handed over the cash, signed what they told me to sign, and then they brought it out. My truck. Still the same faded blue, still ugly as sin to anyone who didn't know better, but to me, it was more than that. I ran my hand along the hood without even thinking. There's a dent near the front left corner where my dad dropped a wrench the first time we worked on it together. He laughed about it for 10 minutes straight, said it gave the truck character. Every weld on that frame. We did those side by side in his garage. Late nights, radio playing old country songs, sparks flying while he told stories I didn't realize I'd end up memorizing. He passed 3 months after we finished restoring it. So yeah, it wasn't just a truck. And standing there in that lot, knowing some HOA guy signed a piece of paper and had it dragged away like it was junk, it did something to me. On the drive back, I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone, just sat there with the engine humming, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift like it always had been, and all I could think about was how easily they'd taken it. Like I didn't matter. Like my property didn't matter. Like I didn't even exist unless I fit into their little version of how things should look. By the time I pulled back into my driveway, the sky had gone dark. I parked the truck exactly where it had been before, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a minute. Then I got out, and instead of going inside, I walked down the edge of my property, past the trees, toward their precious little parking lot. The lights were on over there, bright white, casting everything in this clean, artificial glow. Rows of polished SUVs and sedans lined up perfectly, like a showroom nobody asked for. And that's when I noticed it. Something small at first, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A metal survey marker, half buried near the corner of the lot. Old, worn down, but still there. And the second I saw it, something clicked. A memory. My grandfather, sitting on the porch years ago, telling me about that exact stretch of land. How the county had worked out some temporary deal so the development could use it for overflow parking while they expanded. Temporary. I remember asking him once why he never sold it outright. He just shrugged and said, "Never give away something you might need back one day." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Standing there now, staring at that marker under those bright lights, I realized something. That land, it might not be theirs. And for the first time since I found that empty space, I smiled. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was still angry, though that was definitely still there, sitting in my chest like a low-burning fire, but because something else had taken over. Curiosity, mixed with that quiet kind of determination you only get when you realize you might not be as powerless as someone thought you were. I kept seeing that survey marker in my head, half buried, ignored, like it didn't matter anymore. But I knew better, or at least, I was starting to. So around midnight, I ended up out in the garage, digging through an old metal filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. The thing still had my dad's handwriting on a strip of tape across the top. Land docs/don't lose this stuff, which, knowing him, meant it was probably important enough that I should have looked at it a long time ago. Folders stacked on folders, yellowed papers, old receipts, property maps, the kind of paperwork nobody wants to deal with until they absolutely have to. And then I found it. A folded document, thicker than the rest, stamped with the county seal. The original deed. I laid it out on the workbench, smoothing it with both hands like I was afraid it might disappear if I didn't hold it down, and I started reading. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm definitely not the kind of guy who enjoys legal language, but some things don't need a degree to understand. Parcel boundaries, coordinates, ownership, and right there, clear as day, the section where that parking lot sat, still under my family's name. There was an addendum attached, dated decades back, granting temporary use rights to what was then just a small local development project. Signed by my grandfather and a county official. Temporary. No transfer of ownership. No expiration date listed, but also no permanent easement. Which meant, if I was understanding this right, they were only using that land because nobody had ever told them to stop. I leaned back against the workbench, exhaled slowly, and just stared at the paper. All this time, I muttered to myself. It almost felt unreal, like finding out a piece of your life had been quietly sitting there, waiting for you to notice it. But then the other thought crept in. They towed my truck. No warning, no conversation, no respect. And suddenly, this didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like an opportunity. The next morning, I was up early. Didn't bother with breakfast, just grabbed the folder, tossed it on the passenger seat, and drove straight into town. The county office building looked exactly like it always had, beige walls, fluorescent lights, people moving slower than time itself. I took a number, sat down, and waited, and waited, and waited some more. By the time my number got called, I'd gone through every version of this situation in my head. Best case, worst case, everything in between. The woman at the desk was older, glasses hanging low on her nose. The kind of person who looked like she'd seen every possible version of confused landowner walk through those doors. "What can I help you with?" she asked, not unkindly. I slid the deed across the counter. "I need to understand something," I said. "And if I'm right, I might need to change it." She pulled the document closer, adjusted her glasses, and started reading. No rush. No reaction. Just quiet focus. A couple minutes passed before she looked up at me. Where exactly is the parcel in question? She asked. Edge of Silver Creek Estates. Their overflow parking lot. That got a reaction. Not dramatic, just a slight pause. A flicker of recognition. She said, and went back to the paperwork. More typing. More clicking. She pulled something up on her screen, cross-referenced it with the map attached to the deed. Then she leaned back slightly. Well, she said, this is interesting. That's never a neutral word in a place like that. Interesting how? I asked. She turned the monitor slightly, so I could see. A map. Clean lines, colored sections, property boundaries clearly marked. And there it was. That lot. Highlighted, but not under the HOA's ownership. Under mine. They've been operating on what appears to be an informal continuation of a temporary use agreement, she explained. But as far as current records show, ownership was never transferred. I felt something tighten in my chest again. But this time, it wasn't anger. It was clarity. So what does that mean? I asked. She looked at me for a moment, like she was deciding how blunt to be. It means, she said, that if you choose to revoke access, you have the legal right to do so. Just like that. No dramatic music. No courtroom scene. Just a sentence. And suddenly, everything shifted. What would that involve? I asked. She turned back to her computer, already typing. Filing a formal revocation of use, notifying the current occupying party, and allowing a reasonable compliance period, typically 30 days. 30 days. I nodded slowly. And after that, they would need to vacate the property, she said, or negotiate new terms with you. Negotiate. That word landed differently, because now, for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't the one reacting anymore. I was the one holding the leverage. I filed the paperwork that same day, signed everything they put in front of me, paid the processing fees, and walked out of that building with a receipt in my hand and something else sitting just beneath the surface. Anticipation. The next few weeks moved in a strange kind of rhythm. On the outside, nothing changed. The HOA kept using the lot like they always had. Cars coming and going, weekend events, tennis matches, brunch gatherings. All the little routines of a place that had gotten very comfortable. And I let them. Didn't say a word. Didn't put up a sign. Didn't even park my truck there, even though technically, I could have. Because this wasn't about making noise. It was about timing. Every few days, I'd check in with the county office, just to track the status. Pending. Processing. Under review. Each update bringing me a little closer to something I could feel building, not just as a plan, but as a moment. And somewhere in the middle of all that waiting, I started noticing things I hadn't before, like how the HOA board members carried themselves, especially Gerald Pike. I saw him one afternoon near the clubhouse, talking to a couple residents. Even from a distance, you could tell the kind of man he was, confident in that way that comes from never being challenged. Perfect lawn, perfect shirt, perfect little world. And right behind him, that parking lot. My parking lot. He didn't know it yet. None of them did. But they were standing on borrowed ground. And the clock was ticking. Day 27, I got the call. Mr. Mercer? The same woman from the county office said. Your revocation has been approved. Official notice has been logged and delivered. I closed my eyes for a second, just letting that sink in. So it's done? I asked. It is, she said. As of now, that property is fully under your control again. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there in my truck, engine off, hands resting on the wheel. For a long moment, I didn't move, didn't speak, just listened to the quiet. And then, slowly, I nodded to myself. All right, I said under my breath. Let's go. I didn't rush it. That's the thing people always assume. Like the second I got that approval, I just went charging in, kicking up dust, and making a scene. But no. It wasn't like that at all. If anything, I slowed down. Because when you finally have control, real control, you don't need to prove it by being loud. You prove it by choosing exactly when to act. So I waited until Friday. Late enough that most people had already cleared out. Early enough that the weekend crowd hadn't taken over yet. That quiet window where a place like that is in between identities. I drove down just before sunset, parked off to the side, and sat there for a minute watching the last few cars pull out of the lot. A silver SUV backed up, paused, then rolled away. Then a black sedan followed. And just like that, it was empty. Clean. still, like it was holding its breath. I made a call. Yeah, I said, we're good to go. About 30 minutes later, the first truck rolled in, then another behind it. A small crew, nothing flashy, just guys who knew how to work and didn't ask unnecessary questions. They started unloading posts, rolls of chain link fencing, bags of concrete. The kind of setup you don't bring unless you plan on finishing the job in one shot. One of them looked over at me. You want the full perimeter? I nodded. All of it. No gaps. He gave a short grin. All right then. And they got to work. There's something strangely satisfying about watching something take shape overnight, especially when it's something nobody expects. The sound of metal clinking, posts being driven into the ground, the low hum of a generator powering tools, it all blended into this steady rhythm that felt intentional. Like every second was moving things exactly where they needed to go. I walked the edge of the lot while they worked, hands in my pockets, just taking it in. That same space that had looked so polished, so controlled, now had dirt kicked up, tools scattered, lines being drawn where there hadn't been any before. By the time the sky started to lighten, it was done. A full chain link barrier wrapped around the entire lot, clean and solid, with a wide gate at the front secured by a heavy lock. And every 20 feet or so, bright red signs. Private property. No parking. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. I stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Not smiling. Not gloating. Just steady. Then I headed back home, grabbed some coffee, and waited. It didn't take long. Around mid-morning, I could hear it, even from my place. The distant sound of engines slowing, stopping, starting again. Car doors opening and closing. Voices, confused at first, then louder. By the time I walked back down toward the road, it was already unfolding. Cars lined up along the entrance, drivers getting out, staring at the fence like it had appeared out of nowhere. Which, in a way, it had. What the hell is this? One guy said, hands on his hips. Wasn't this open yesterday? Another woman asked, looking around like someone might explain it. I stayed back at first, just watching, letting it breathe. Because the realization, that's the part you can't rush. It has to land on its own. A couple of residents started trying to maneuver into side streets, squeezing their cars into spots that clearly weren't meant for overflow traffic. Others just sat there, staring at the signs like maybe if they read them enough times, the words would change. Then someone spotted me. Hey, a voice called out. Do you know what's going on here? I stepped forward, calm, unhurried. Yeah, I said. I do. That was about the moment it clicked for a few of them. Not fully, not yet, but enough that you could see the shift. The questions turning into something sharper. And right on cue, his car pulled up. Gerald Pike. Same polished look, same pressed shirt, same expression that said he expected the world to behave in a certain way, until it didn't. He stepped out, took one look at the fence, then at the crowd, then his eyes landed on me. And just like that, the temperature changed. He walked over, quick but controlled. What is this? He demanded. I tilted my head slightly. Looks like a fence. A couple people nearby let out quiet laughs, the kind they try to hide but can't quite. His jaw tightened. You can't just block off community property. I reached into the folder I'd brought with me, pulled out a copy of the deed, and held it up just enough for him to see. It's not community property, I said. Hasn't been. Not legally. He didn't take it right away, just stared at it like it offended him. That's ridiculous, he said. We've been using this land for years. Yeah, I replied. You have. There was a pause there, a small one, but heavy. Under a temporary agreement, I continued. One that's been revoked. He finally grabbed the paper, scanned it quickly, his expression shifting from irritation to something else, something tighter. You should have brought this to the board, he said, trying to regain ground. We could have discussed. You towed my truck. I cut in, still calm, but firmer now. From my property. No warning. No conversation. Just decided it didn't belong. That vehicle was in violation of. It was on my land. That landed. Not loud, but solid. The kind of statement that doesn't leave much room to argue. For a second, he didn't respond. Just looked at me, weighing something. Then, what do you want? He asked. There it was. Not authority. Not assumption. A question. I let a small breath out, like I'd been waiting for that exact moment. What I want, I said, is to be made whole. $1,200 for the tow, and $10,000 for the use of my land without permission. A couple people in the crowd reacted to that. Whispers, raised eyebrows, but I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on him. That's absurd, he said, but there was less certainty in it now. What's absurd, I replied, is thinking you could take from someone and never have to answer for it. He opened his mouth, probably to push back again, then closed it. Because he knew. Or at least, he was starting to. This isn't over, he said finally. I nodded once. It will be when we're done. The next few days were tense. Lawyers got mentioned. Emails got sent. Voicemails left that sounded a lot more polite than the first conversation we had. But the fence stayed. The signs stayed. And every day that lot sat empty, the pressure built. Because for them, it wasn't just inconvenience, it was visibility. Every resident, every guest, every event. All of them now had to deal with something they'd never had to think about before. Limits. By the end of the week, they called. Not Gerald this time. Someone else from the board, voice careful, measured. We'd like to resolve this, she said. Good, I replied. The meeting was short. No theatrics. No raised voices. Just numbers, terms, signatures. They paid. Every dollar. And then some. They asked about leasing the space long-term, tried to frame it like a partnership, something mutually beneficial. I listened, nodded, and then I said no. Simple as that. Because some things, you don't give back once you've taken them back. A few days later, I had the fencing adjusted, brought in gravel, cleared it out the way I wanted, turned it into something that actually served me. A place for my truck, my trailer, my space. Now, every so often, I'll see them drive past, slower than they used to. Not staring, but noticing. And I can't help but wonder what goes through their heads in those moments. Maybe it's frustration. Maybe it's regret. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the realization that respect isn't something you get to enforce with rules and notices. Sometimes, it's something you learn the hard way. And here's the thing. I still think about that first night sometimes, standing there staring at that empty spot where my truck used to be. How easy it would have been to just pay the fee, get it back, and move on. Most people would have. So I guess the question is, should I have? Or did they get exactly what was coming to them? I'm curious what you think, because depending on who you ask, I'm either the guy who stood up for himself, or the guy who took it way too far. Let me know where you land.